Here's an article that has been circulating on the internet for a while, so I want to cover that briefly if you haven't heard of this guy, and then do a deeper analysis. It's a story written by a guy named John Levine that says YouTube socialist Carlos Maza slams the wealthy but lived in luxury. And you can see here he self-applies the term communist. He basically takes every insult that's thrown at him and just calls himself by that in a way to mock his critics, I suppose. But the article goes, Carlos Maza doesn't like rich people. The social media socialist with more than 150,000 followers on Twitter and YouTube regularly uses his platforms to rail against the wealthy and powerful and urges fans to be skeptical of their opinions. Carlos tweets, "Just found out James Carville, who spends his time lecturing Democrats for being too far left, lives in an absolutely obscene 4-story mansion," Maza said, blasting the longtime Democratic strategist and posting a photo of Carville's old home to his Twitter account. He also says things like, "Dear God, can we stop taking political advice from the ultra-wealthy? You really have to respect this guy's grift, constantly dressing in normal clothes on TV to feign relatability while living like this. Masterful con artist." And Carlos, who I guess is apparently gay, says, "We should treat gay people the same way we treat straight people, eating them when they get too rich." Like any good online socialist, Maza raises money for his internet presence through a Patreon account where his, quote, comrades, a word he uses to describe his supporters, can fund him $2, $5, and $10 a month. But if Maza wants to start eating the rich, he may have to begin with his own family. So this millennial is connected to multiple Florida mega mansions, a $7.1 million pad on the Upper West Side purchased under an LLC, and a yacht by luxury boat maker Donzi. Of course, I've never heard of Donzi, but then I don't own any boats. I do have a kayak. I guess I got a kayak at Walmart for $100. So there's my luxury. Maza's mother, Vivian Maza, was one of the first employees at Ultimate Software, a Florida-based behemoth that now employs more than 5,000 people. Starting in 1990 as an office manager, she somehow rose to be the group's chief people officer in 2004. Well, how'd that happen? Well, his mother, Vivian Maza, developed a close personal relationship with the company founder, Scott Schur. So close that an independent assessment of the company in 2016 cited the relationship as a corporate governance concern. The report said the pair were believed to be, quote, more than just co-workers and have a, quote, familial relationship. The two later became engaged, and the couple has lived together for years, with Schur being de facto stepfather to Carlos. Public records show Vivian, Scott, Carlos, and sister Isabel all registered to vote at a 5-bedroom, 8-bathroom waterfront palace in the Boca Raton, Florida. The property sold in 2018 for $10.8 million, according to Zillow. Schur also unloaded a 4-bedroom, 4-bath home in Weston, Florida, for $1.8 million in 2015. Vivian currently resides full-time in a $4.4 million, 2-bedroom, 3-bath luxury condo in Fort Lauderdale, which she lists as her primary residence, according to a 2020 report. And I like looking at Zillow. There aren't any homes for sale in my zip code for $4.4 million. There aren't any homes listed for sale in my zip code for half that much money. This is crazy money. So the same LLC purchased a $7.1 million condo on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in 2017. While serving as CEO of Ultimate Software, Carlos's stepfather was handsomely compensated as a CEO. In 2015, he took home $38.3 million. In 2008, his total stock and options were valued at $17.8 million, with shares selling for about $35 a share. In 2019, the company sold for $11 billion, with stock going for $331 a share, almost certainly making Schur and family nine-figure millionaires, if not billionaires. It's not clear how much Vivian and Schur actively support Maza's lifestyle, but evidence suggests the family has been happy to pitch in to help spread his socialist message, because they would be extremely powerful. The more you concentrate power, the more powerful they would become. They're not stupid. These are definitely not stupid people. Not moral, however, but they are very smart. And the younger Maza himself admitted in an interview that his family was there to financially back him if needed. Viv and Scott have also pitched in on the rent for Carlos's East Village pad just across from Tompkins Square Park, friends tell the Post. Rents for one-bedrooms like Carlos's cost upward of $3,000 a month. I think a lot of these people are unhappy. I'm sure this guy is just craving some attention, Carville told the Post. He goes on, I don't have $1 billion, but whatever I have, my daddy didn't give me. I think I inherited like $11,000. Maza did not respond to multiple inquiries from the Post, but in a statement posted to Twitter in advance of the publication, the Socialist fessed up to the silver spoons. Said, quote, my mom and her fiancé are very wealthy, thanks to a software company they started together when I was a kid. As a result, I've gotten to live a life of tremendous privilege. As a result, Maza acknowledged he always had a safety net should his career as a YouTube socialist go south, but insisted nobody is bankrolling his effort and that his mother only donates $10 a month. Now, what's interesting is this John Levine, after he published this story, keep in mind Carlos's family is very connected in the tech industry, he was suspended off of Twitter, and no explanation was given. Then later, the Twitter unlocked his account and said their action against him was, quote, an error. And then it appears, after some complaining by Maza's family, John Levine was then again suspended for, I don't know, apparently leaking some uncomfortable truths. And so a couple other things to point out about this Carlos guy. He is responsible for getting an awful lot of conservatives banned. Chances are, if there's someone on the right who you've enjoyed listening to, he has had a hand in getting them kicked off. And in fact, he worked at the site Vox, if you've ever heard of that. And he even went as far as a very public online feud with Steven Crowder. And he tried to get him banned, but of course Crowder is so large and has his own army of lawyers. It's just like anytime powerful, influential people fight. But he did apparently succeed in getting Crowder demonetized. So that's the story in a nutshell. But what I really want to focus on is the wealth here, to put the wealth in context. Now, I understand he personally doesn't have $11 billion. His family didn't quite probably get all that, although they had incredible salaries and stock options. Let's just use 11 billion as a working number. And I want to point out too, when I mention that journalists are bad at math, or a lot of us, when we hear these large numbers, because I don't have billions in my bank account, I don't have millions. You want to talk to me about $200, I can contextualize that. The point is to bring awareness to the fact that when journalists write about science and math, these are the kids that were running away from doing science and math. It just means they don't know what they're talking about. And so numbers become more useful to writers in the rhetorical sense, the emotional impact that they have, rather than actually having a contextual understanding of what those numbers mean. And so a lot of people's ideas, Maza's included, are self-refutational if you do an analysis on the numbers they themselves provide. So I want to look at the number 11 billion. We'll say this guy has even more money than Trump, because think about it. Trump built up his supposed $10 billion of wealth over the course of a lifetime, starting, I think, with selling condos. His family had an 11 billion deal in 1 year. That was just 1 year, probably a good one. So take that number, and we're going to look at the GDP of countries across the world. Of course, GDP is not an exact apples to apples comparison, but that's fine. We're not interested in apples and apples. We're just interested in contextualizing how much money is $11 billion really. So let's look at GDP, and just a refresher. GDP is the monetary value of all finished goods and services made within a country during a specific period. It's usually a yearly thing, and it's just basically the whole population, the whole productive output of a given population. So here we are at Worldometer information. It's GDP by country. And so let's go look at the GDPs of entire countries here, because we're gonna get a real feel for just how much $11 billion is. Here we have the United States on top at 19 trillion, China at 12 trillion, Japan coming up third at 4 trillion, Germany at about 3.5 trillion. And so you can see countries we're familiar with: Germany, France, we're still in the trillions of dollars, Russia 1.5 trillion. But we go down here and it's by 17, Turkey 852 billion. So we're getting down there. Iran 454 billion, Norway 400 billion, Israel 353 billion. And so we keep looking. We have Portugal, 219 billion. These numbers, you're beginning to get a context of the size of the country, the population, and just how much money this means. The entire productive capacity here. We have Cuba, 96 billion. Luxembourg, that little postage stamp, 62 billion. Okay, we're going down. Serbia is at 40 billion. Libya is at 38 billion. We're getting closer. Iceland, 25 billion. Let's see, Zimbabwe, 22 billion. I'm sure that's mostly just printed. Let's go on down. Now we're down here at around 12. We're down here at around Carlos Maza's family of 4. It sounds like his mom, his dad, him, and a sister. We have 12 billion is everyone in the Bahamas. Armenia, 11 billion. Madagascar, 11 billion. Chad, 9 billion. So Carlos Maza's family of 4 has more money than the entire productivity for a year of everyone in Chad, everyone in Rwanda, everyone in Congo, everyone in Haiti, everyone in Niger. You can just see Guam. They're more than double Guam. 5.8 billion is the GDP of Guam. And so, let's see, he comes in around, he would be about the 131st most wealthy country in the world. 132, 131, 132. And when you go down this list, this list has 189 countries, which is about a third of the world. About a third of the countries in the world have a GDP less than 11 billion. Now, I pointed out left-wing people that follow the left-wing ideology all suffer from this myth of eternal supply. Now, can you understand why Carlos Maza would mistakenly believe that leftist ideology is the correct path? He has more wealth than a third of the countries in the world in a family of 4. And now can you appreciate just how much wealth the United States and the free market has created? If a family of 4 is wealthier than a third of the countries in the world, it's absolutely incredible, the potential we get from freedom. And so to give you a little further contextualization on these numbers, I want to look at this. This is a pretty neat graph. This is a timeline of the world's economic history going back to 1 AD, and it's the world's GDP by year. And so we can start here in the current year, and it's about 121 trillion for the entire, all of humanity working for a year. And you can see just how rapidly things have changed. Even since the 90s, we're at about 44. And then you go back down here, the 70s, 21 trillion. You can see the Great Depression. The entire productive capacity of humanity was about 5 trillion. And it was funny, it barely even shows up on this. We can see, you go back further, 1792, we're looking at about 1 trillion for all of humanity here. In 1492, when Columbus supposedly discovered America, the journey of Columbus, the whole wealth of all of humanity was about 433 billion. You go back here to 1000 AD, this would be like the Viking Age. The whole wealth of all of humanity was 211 billion. And you get all the way back to the time of Christ, and the wealth of the productive capacity of all of humanity is about 184 billion. Now, to put that in perspective, that's roughly the market cap of the company Pepsi. You know, it's gone down a little bit because of the financial, the events of the world today. But that's about what Pepsi's market cap is. So to put that in context, when the devil tempted Jesus and said, "I will make you the Lord of the earth," it would be the equivalent today of saying, "Hey, you want to be the CEO of Pepsi Cola?" And so we can see here, Carlos Maza's net worth is about 5%. 11 billion is about 5% of 184 billion. If you went back 2,000 years ago, his family of 4 has 5% of all the wealth of every human being alive working. So I encourage you to look at this. Actually, this is a really cool graph. I'll link to everything below. So now that you have some context to just how wealthy this guy Carlos really is, I thought, what is a turning word that can be applied to describing what this guy does? And I thought, we have what people call mansplaining, or we have, the even worse, white-splaining. I thought, as condescending as those terms are, there's one that's really appropriate here when applied to Carlos, and it's brat-splaining. He's a spoiled brat. And no matter what he does, he will always be a spoiled brat. He came from incredible wealth. He's wealthier than a third of the countries in the world. And think about it. He basically puts his whole life on the internet, but there's one important factor that he's tried to hide. This is the one part about him that he tries to cover up. And that's his connection to incredible wealth. It's what he's embarrassed about. It's what he apparently feels great guilt or shame about. So, of course, that's what the term bratsplaining would highlight and pick out. And it's a name that he will not self-apply. So all his work, whether it's YouTube video or article written on Vox or his tweets, it's all just some rich kid bratsplaining to a bunch of people that actually have to work for a living. So I want to finish this video off, and I want to apply some time-tested wisdom to this situation. And I want to share with you one of my favorite of Aesop's fables. It's called The Farmer and His Sons. A certain farmer, lying at the point of death, called his sons around him and gave into their charge his fields and vineyards, telling them that a treasure lay hidden somewhere in them, within a foot of the surface of the ground. His sons thought he spoke of money that he had hidden, and after he was buried, they dug most industriously all over the estate, but found nothing. The soil being so well loosened, however, the succeeding crops were of unequaled richness, and the sons then found out what their father had in view, telling them to dig for hidden treasure. And the moral is, industry is fortune's right hand. And this is usually the point that I cut to the heavy rain sound, and it's kind of like think that one over for yourself. But I'd like to do a little bit of a deeper thought experiment on this scenario. So imagine the consequences of the productivity. These sons have a banner year. They have all these crops. Well, what happens in the village that they live in? There is now excess supply. Well, all of a sudden, people that were farming, that were just scraping by, are going to say, hey, look, the Johnson kids, they made all this food. I don't have to spend my days farming. Maybe I really like metalworking, so I'm going to do metal work, and I'll trade them some of what I create for some food because they're going to need horseshoes or whatnot. And so now the town has a blacksmith. Another guy, maybe his back hurts, he's getting a little older, and he's been scraping out a living, and he's like, hey, I can also work with leather. And so his labor is now freed up. You now have a tanner in the city, and maybe you have a cobbler, and you've got someone, you've got shoes, you've got clothes, textiles, all these industries start popping up. There was a little old lady that was just barely scraping by, getting her bean plants to grow. Well, she can now be a nurse because it turns out she has a deep knowledge of healing herbs. And so now you have a medical industry in this village, all because the father was wise enough to understand how to harness the greed of his sons. Notice we didn't transcend greed. We didn't shame greed. We didn't eliminate that. This is part of the human experience. But the free market and hard work and capitalism allows us to harness and use greed productively. And the results, the fruits, if you will, speak for themselves. And so think about this. The population is going to begin to grow. Starvation goes down. Life expectancy goes up. The quality of life goes up. Well, the next thing you know, there's 4 boys that they're not very strong. They have weak constitutions, and they were born into a family whose, who knows, textile business is booming. And so they don't really have to work. And so they get together and grab their lutes or whatever, their stringed instruments, and they start playing songs and eating the strange mushrooms they find in the forest. And they name themselves after a bug that lives under rocks in some nasty bog. And they begin playing at the local taverns. Of course, they live in so much excess, they begin preaching that everyone should live their lifestyle because of this myth of eternal supply. And so as they play music and they live according to their animal urges, they begin to convert the youth to this idea. As Carlos Maza says, I just think that everyone should be able to smoke weed and hang out in the park and listen to music. The same with our group of musicians here in our theoretical town. They don't understand where the excess supply came from. So why not live in hedonistic indulgence because nothing's ever going to run out? And of course, as more and more people take to this idea, well, eventually the production goes down. There's less excess supply. Maybe there's a panic for some reason. They run out of, well, worse than toilet paper, and everybody starves. And I guess in a way we're just sort of doomed to live and repeat this cycle. Where comes the quote from G. Michael Hopf? Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times.